The big story coming in from India, where in the wake of mounting criticism, the government has decided to exempt sanitary napkins from the goods and services tax. The move comes after many hues and cries of several activists raising their voices after sanitary napkins were included under the GST bracket in the 12% slab. The plea to exempt sanitary napkin from GST has been going on for long. These sanitary napkins were taxed at 12% under the one-year-old GST regime, attracting serious criticism for various quarters. Several students and activists had launched a campaign by writing messages on sanitary napkins to Prime Minister Modi earlier this year, urging him to exempt the tax levies on the hygiene product and make it free of cost. It was last year the Delhi High Court had questioned the government on the matter, asking why sanitary napkins were not exempted from GST when products like bindi, sindoor and kajal were excluded from the ambit. In a country where a large number of women in rural areas don't have easy access to sanitary napkins, the decision to keep it under the 12% slab did not go down well with the people. So here is a big relief. The government has decided to do away with the 12% levy on sanitary napkins. For more on this, I'm joined by WION's political editor Karthik Sharma. Karthik, a lot of announcements have been made by the GST Council today. However, one of the most headline-grabbing news is, and it's a big relief, that sanitary napkins have been exempted from the ambit of GST.
You see, this campaign was started by Congress MP Sushmita Dev. I think 1.5 or 2 years back, when certain provisions of GST were being implemented on articles and utilities like sanitary napkins, which have to do with sanitation. And in a country where women's sanitation becomes inaccessible to poor sections of the society. So a lot of people said that the GST regime requires rationalization. They need to see what to tax and what not to tax. So I think that's a very welcome step. But I've been also given to believe that certain other basic commodities and their tax structures have been rationalized, which includes air conditioners, fridge, basic utility items. India is a warm weather country, so to have a taxation on equipment like that was also causing a lot of heartburn. But nonetheless, you see, sanitary napkin became a symbol, that the exercise was not done properly, and they just divided various items, various things into 4 or 5 categories and distributed between state and center and levied GST on them. So the criticism was that the mind did not go in terms of where GST should be implemented, where it should not be implemented. Like, if, for example, the food bills in the restaurant sector have gone high because of GST. The argument of the government is people who can afford to go out can afford to pay taxes. But they also need to understand that eating out industry, it creates a lot of jobs. You go to Tokyo, you go to New York, eating out is cheaper. It's cheaper to eat out rather than bring groceries home, invest that much of time in cooking it. But then ultimately it also depends on how people perceive eating out to be. So I think GST infrastructure needs to be even rationalized further. It is a welcome step of in context of sanitary napkin, what the government has done.
Right. Karthik, another thing before I let you go, a lot of developments were expected on the consumer durable front also. They were saying that the cost of vending machine will go down. Any details on that front apart from the sanitary napkins?
Yes. I've been given to believe that certain other electronic and consumer-oriented items, GST structure is being rationalized for them.
Right.
Now, the details are not clear, Archana, whether they are in 8%, 12% category. But the category of taxation is being reduced.
All right. Thank you so much, Karthik, for that latest update. The big story coming in that India has scrapped a tax on sanitary napkins. For more on this, I'm joined by lawyer and activist Abha Singh. Abha, thank you so much for speaking to World is One News. What is your response to this story? A much-awaited relief, finally?
Of course, it's a much-awaited relief, and also it shows that the government is concerned about women issues. And in fact, the very first place when 12% GST was imposed on sanitary napkins, there was a lot of unhappiness, and it showed that there was no application of mind, because even today, 68% of women in this country use cloth for menstruation, and with increasing 12%, that percentage would have gone down. However, by removing the GST, the use of sanitary napkins would go up. Also, it would become affordable. Even in rural areas, it is not being used. But I think now wiser counsels have prevailed on the government. But another issue that comes in, that people want that the import on sanitary napkins, tax on import of sanitary napkins from China should be increased so as to promote the local industry. I think that also the government needs to look into.
All right, Ms. Singh, please hold on. I'm also joined by another guest, Advita Kala, on the broadcast. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. What's your response to this? After a lot of criticism, campaigns and hues and cries, finally the government has decided to do away with the GST, that 12% levy on sanitary napkins. Your response?
Absolutely welcome. Of course, one hopes that it had come without this kind of protest, because it was just so plain to see that if you were promoting female health, hygiene, and really independence, then one had to make this accessible to women across class. And the fact that it's taken so long is disappointing, that it happened after so much protest. But once again, it's a good thing that it's happened.
Right. Earlier there were a lot of voices that wanted to ask this question, that, there's no GST on kajal, on sindoor, on a lot of issues. But why sanitary napkins? And like Abhaji was telling us, that 60% of women still don't have access to sanitary napkins. The rationale that a lot of people were giving was that this taxation was imposed to cushion the local manufacturers, because it was important to protect them. What do you think about that side of the story? That will this be a setback to the manufacturers?
Well, I remember at the time when this debate was very ripe, and, there was a lot of opposition and the protests, as you mentioned, people were splitting down the things, the items really that are used to make a sanitary napkin, and how different taxes on each of those items that were used would impact the cost and how it would impact business. But I think, this is something that is a necessity. It is a regular necessity for women. And I think the volume will justify any kind of a cost that they feel will be borne by manufacturers, really, because this is not a need that is going to go away. In fact, this will make sanitary napkins far more accessible to women, as they should be, and increase demand.
Right. Thank you so much, Aditya Kala, for that perspective on this big story. All right, Abha Singh is still with us. Ma'am, I wanted to ask you, and the same question that I asked Advita was that the other side of the story is that the government had been saying, a lot of people were saying that it would hurt the manufacturers, because this tax was sort of a cushion for them, and this in a way gives the Chinese companies make inroads into the Indian market, because their products will be cheap, so that sort of harms the Indian companies. How do you see that argument panning out?
The line of argument was that because there will be no GST, the manufacturers would not be able to get the input credit, and as it is, they have to pay the taxes at the making level. But you have to see the larger picture. I think GST was put because people primarily thought that sanitary napkins are used by the upper strata of the society, and it was something to do with luxury, not realizing that this is a health-related issue, and with the cervical cancer rising, menstrual hygiene becoming a very important factor. I think now the government has realized that sanitary napkins are not something to do with upper strata or luxury. It is a necessity. It is a health necessity. And on that line, the GST has been removed totally.
Agree with you totally. Thank you so much, Abha Singh, for your views on this. So much awaited relief. Big development there. India has decided to scrap taxation on sanitary napkins. A lot of women, a lot of activists had come forth and criticized the government for imposing 12% GST, saying that it's not a luxury. It's a product of personal hygiene, and every woman, every girl needs it in the country on a daily basis. And you can't impose 12% taxation on something as basic as a sanitary napkin. So there, the government finally surrendering, or rather rectifying that mistake of imposing 12% taxation. We'll keep our focus on that story.